Welcome to Module 4. This module covers topics related to the Crisis and Trauma Counseling and Interventions Knowledge Domain, which encompasses 6% of the questions on the CRC exam. The information in this module is organized into 2 lessons. 1. Client Risk Assessments and Safety Plans, Polytrauma Injuries, and Emergency Management Systems, and 2. Crisis Intervention and the Impact of Trauma on People with Disabilities. The CRC exam includes 2 major sections, Rehabilitation and Disability, and Counseling. The learning objectives are organized based on this structure. There are no Rehabilitation and Disability learning objectives for this topic, but there are for counseling. By the completion of this module, students will be able to evaluate client risk in order to construct a safety plan, implement rehabilitation counseling services for individuals with polytrauma injuries, describe the impact of crises, disasters, and other trauma-causing events on people with disabilities, operationalize crisis intervention principles for clients with disabilities experiencing a trauma-causing event, and describe the emergency management system within rehabilitation agencies and in the community. The learning objectives and topics covered were generated based on information provided on the CRCC website. Module 4.1, Client Risk Assessments and Safety Plans, Polytrauma Injuries, and Emergency Management Systems. Assessment of client risk and development of a safety plan. Risk assessment is performed after an individual experiences trauma and is designed to determine what negative effects may have resulted due to this event and to help counselors plan ways to mitigate effects of the trauma. Risks can be categorized into those that are modifiable, anxiety, depression, loss of income, and those that are not, age, gender. Risk assessment can be performed through observation, interviews, and standardized assessment instruments. Risk assessment may focus on safety concerns, health plans, environmental concerns, emotional or psychological concerns, support system availability or lack thereof, or community resources. A safety plan is created in trauma counseling situations to avoid potentially preventable injury or death to a client. The safety plan may differ depending on the client's potential risk, e.g., a client with depression may have a safety plan focusing on coping skills and mitigating suicidal ideation, or presence of a disability, e.g., a client with a newly acquired below-the-knee double amputation may focus on fall risks and injury prevention. Developing a safety plan includes conducting a risk assessment, discussing the risk assessment findings with the client and family if appropriate, working with the client and family to develop a feasible safety plan, and outlining specific steps to mitigate risks. Information related to polytrauma injuries. Polytrauma injuries involve injuries to 2 or more physical areas or organ systems. Clients with polytrauma injuries often require care from multiple different healthcare specialties, e.g., physical therapists, occupational therapists, speech-language pathologists, mental health providers, etc. It is paramount that the members of the interdisciplinary team providing care to the individual with polytrauma injuries have strong and responsive communications with each other, can understand and appropriately use medical terms used in other allied healthcare settings, i.e., the speech-language pathologist has a functional understanding of medical terminology used by the physical therapist, and have an overarching knowledge of the health systems from which the individual is receiving services. Members of the interdisciplinary health team should meet often to discuss the client's diagnosis, prognosis, treatment plans, improvement progress, functional limitations, and possible necessary accommodations for home, work, or school activities. Rehabilitation counseling services for individuals with polytrauma injuries. Rehabilitation counselors should be prepared to be a member of the interdisciplinary team providing care for an individual with polytrauma injuries. In addition to the expectations of the interdisciplinary team listed previously, rehabilitation counselors should be able to collaborate with the individual's family, include members in interdisciplinary team meetings, educate members on the individual's injuries, provide supports and resources, offer family counseling interventions, etc. Provide cognitive remediation services, self-management support services, employment services, transitional employment services, customized employment services, supported employment services, and address any motivation to work barriers experienced by the individual with polytrauma injuries. Emergency management system within rehabilitation agencies and the community. An emergency is an incident that requires responsive action to protect life or property. A disaster is a natural catastrophe, such as hurricanes or floods, technological incident like a nuclear explosion, or human-caused event that results in severe property damage, death, or multiple injuries. A crisis is a prolonged state of difficulty, trouble, or danger that allows more time for thought and decision-making on how to confront and mitigate the problem. Emergencies and disasters require immediate attention and rely on emergency management systems and preparedness. The President determines if federal assistance is needed to supplement state and local efforts to save lives, protect property, or maintain public health and safety. Emergency management systems. Rehabilitation counselors must understand the emergency management systems in place with their local, state, and federal government, as well as the emergency management systems of their allied health organizations. Emergency management systems are coordinated plans that provide strategies for communication, identifying resources needed, notifying and involving necessary personnel, and plans for recovery. The primary role of rehabilitation agencies within community-wide emergency management systems is to conduct a risk assessment to determine emergency needs and develop a plan that includes strategies, policies, and procedures which coordinate with other community agencies, resources, and first responders. The rehabilitation agency should also have a communication plan that ensures contact is maintained between staff members, supporting organizations, volunteers, physicians, and any other emergency preparedness staff or agencies. In addition to aiding local, state, and federal emergency management systems, rehabilitation agencies and other allied health organizations must also have their own emergency management system in place, designed to address the specific needs of the organization. Organization-specific emergency management plans are written documents referred to as written disaster plans. Written disaster plans should include the overall basic plan, functional annexes, hazard-specific appendices, implementation instructions. The basic plan defines the organization and its role in the event of a disaster, how the organization will function during and after a disaster, the key personnel involved in executing the plan. Additionally, an organization's basic plan defines the organization's purpose and objectives in emergency management, identifies the populations the organization serves during the emergency, outlines the organization's essential functions, and provides the scope of the organization's written disaster plans, identifies possible hazards faced by organization during disaster, and lists the organization's response capabilities. Individualized emergency management plans. The emergency management system and plan for rehabilitation agencies differs from local, state, and federal emergency management plans in that it must be individualized to ensure full access to resources for individuals with a variety of disabilities, whereas local, state, and federal emergency management systems often focus on gaining access and providing help with resources to as many people as possible by focusing on providing aid that will suit the typical citizen, i.e., individuals without disabilities or severe health concerns. Therefore, it is paramount that rehabilitation agencies and other community agencies take proactive steps to make a plan of how assistance will be provided to individuals with disabilities, as they are often left out of consideration when local, state, and federal governments are creating their emergency management system, and their unique needs are therefore overlooked. As individuals with disabilities vary greatly in their functional capabilities and limitations, each individual should work with community organizations to create an individualized emergency plan and have their plan included in the records of the emergency management system. This plan should include how the individual will be informed of an emergency, an individualized plan of action, a disaster kit, and a process for maintaining the plan of action and disaster kit. Module 4.2, Crisis Intervention and Impact of Trauma on People with Disabilities. Topics covered on this review page include use of principles of crisis management for people with disabilities during crisis, disasters, and other trauma-causing events, and the impact of crises, disasters, and other trauma-causing events on people with disabilities. Use of principles of crisis intervention for people with disabilities during crisis, disasters, and other trauma-causing events. Trauma is an enduring condition or event wherein there is an actual or perceived threat to the life and integrity of an individual. Trauma events are so overwhelming that an individual is unable to integrate their emotional response to the event with their previous emotional and mental state. Trauma can produce a long-term impact on an individual and result in unpredictable emotions, flashbacks, strains on relationships, and psychosomatic symptoms. Trauma-causing events include a wide range of individual life events, i.e., physical, emotional, or sexual abuse, injury, accidents, acquired disabilities, etc., as well as emergencies, disasters, and crises, as described on the previous page. However, trauma can also lead to positive outcomes, often referred to as post-traumatic growth. Post-traumatic growth reflects a transformation of beliefs about the self and the world as a result of overcoming the traumatic experience and produces an increased positive self-perception, improved interpersonal relationships, and more optimistic view of the world. Crisis intervention for individuals with disabilities. A personal crisis is an immediate, unpredictable, and highly stressful event, personal event, not local, state, or federal event, as discussed previously, that causes significant distress and overwhelms coping resources, which inhibits the individual from employing their usual coping strategies. Crisis events lead to increased anxiety, fear, depression, and/or anger that may manifest as difficulty sleeping, headaches, or nausea. The crisis state usually lasts less than 6 weeks, during which an individual may experience impaired social functioning or decision-making abilities. In some cases, an individual may need a crisis management or intervention plan in order to overcome the negative effects of the crisis. Crisis intervention is short-term care that occurs immediately following a crisis, disaster, or other trauma-causing event. There are 4 categories of crisis intervention. 1. Sustainment techniques provide emotional support to decrease distress, anxiety, and guilt. 2. Direct influencing techniques guide specific courses of action and mobilize support through connecting with other agencies. 3. Person-situation reflection technique facilitates an understanding and resolution of specific aspects of the crisis. And 4. Dynamic and developmental techniques involve deeper exploration of the individual's role in the crisis. The primary focus of crisis intervention is to alleviate the immediate impact of the event and allow the individual to regain functional independence. The first step in crisis management intervention is an evaluation and assessment of the triggering event, the problem or trauma resulting from the event, and a risk assessment. The crisis management intervention plan should be designed in collaboration with the individual and should include helping the individual gain an understanding of the cause of the crisis, encouraging the individual to freely express thoughts and feelings, teaching the individual different coping mechanisms and adaptive behaviors, and encouraging social interactions. Specific crisis intervention goals include relieving crisis symptoms, restoring prior functioning, identifying leading factors, identifying and applying remedial measures, connecting current stressors with prior life experiences, and developing adaptive coping strategies. There are 8 principles of crisis intervention. 1. Immediate intervention. Individuals cannot withstand crisis for long periods of time. 2. Action. Counselors must actively guide individuals to resolve the crisis. 3. Setting limited goals. Intervention goals should be focused on those that relate to the crisis situation. 4. Facilitating hope. Counselors must set the expectation that the crisis can and will be resolved. 5. Providing support. Counselors' support should facilitate an individual's understanding of the event. 6. Focused problem solving. Counselors should provide tangible, concrete tools useful in resolving immediate problems. 7. Protecting self-image. Prevents feelings of inadequacy, shame, or guilt. And 8. Fostering self-reliance. Counselors should assess the individual's coping skills and foster independence. Although the specific techniques used will depend on the counselor's theoretical orientation, professional background, the nature of the crisis, and the individual's resources. Some common crisis techniques utilized are affective interventions, helping the client express feelings generated by the crisis; cognitive interventions, helping the client eliminate negative beliefs that contributed to the crisis; behavioral tasks, requiring the client to spend more time with other people; and environmental manipulation, referring the client to an agency that can help alleviate financial problems. Crisis interventions for disaster-caused trauma. Additional crisis intervention principles useful for crisis interventions relating to trauma caused by disasters are promoting a sense of safety, promoting calming, promoting sense of self-efficacy and community efficacy, promoting connectedness, and instilling hope. A review of crisis intervention principles for disaster-related trauma based on recommendations from expert panels. Be proactive. Prepare a pragmatic, flexible plan for providing the appropriate services for the individual's current phase in their recovery period. Promote a sense of safety, connectedness, calm, hope, and efficacy. Do no harm by participating in the coordination of groups to learn from others and minimize duplication and gaps in response. Designating interventions on the basis of need and available resources. Committing to evaluation and being open to scrutiny and external review. Considering human rights and cultural sensitivity. Staying updated on evidence-based practices regarding crisis intervention. Maximize participation of the locally impacted population and identify available resources and local capacities. Integrate activities and programs into larger systems to reduce standalone services, reach more people, reduce stigma, and be more sustainable. Use a stepped care approach with responses such as providing practical and wide-reaching help early and providing more specialized care for those who require it. Provide multi-layered supports, e.g. work with media or internet to prepare the community at large or facilitate appropriate cultural healing practices. Provide a spectrum of services including provision of basic needs, assessment at the individual level, screening for high risk, monitoring, formal assessment, and the community level, needs assessment, ongoing monitoring, and program evaluation. Psychological first aid and resilience enhancing support, outreach and information, technical assistance, consultation, and training to local providers, and treatment for individuals with continuing distress or declines in functioning. The impacts of crises, disasters, and other trauma-causing events on people with disabilities. Disasters. While disasters and crises render all people vulnerable, individuals with disabilities are at a much higher risk of negative outcomes due to access, resources, and service barriers that exist before, during, and after a crisis or disaster. Individuals with disabilities are at a higher risk for death, injury, property loss, shelter barriers, and post-disaster vulnerabilities. Children with disabilities are more likely to experience negative emotional and behavioral changes post-disaster than children without disabilities. Individual elements, e.g. living in poverty, member of a marginalized group, comorbid health conditions. Environmental elements, e.g. higher unemployment rates, inadequate housing, and social stigma. And societal elements, e.g. social stigma, exclusion from the decision-making process, combine to place individuals with disabilities at extremely high risk for experiencing negative outcomes after a disaster. Effects of inadequate disaster response plans. Though mass evacuation is a common emergency response for natural disasters, evacuation only occurs if there is adequate time prior to a disaster to evacuate. However, individuals with mobility impairments or limitations, or those who rely on medical interventions for survival, need even more time to prepare to evacuate. Without this extra time, these individuals will likely be left behind or evacuated without their necessary medical devices. Effective response to the evacuation. Effective communication and organization are essential to a successful evacuation, but individuals with disabilities may be unable to access, understand, or respond to the evacuation order notice. For example, individuals with hearing impairments will not hear evacuation sirens or radio announcement, while individuals with intellectual disorders may have trouble understanding the evacuation order or their evacuation route. In these cases, evacuation may not occur in a timely manner or may not occur at all. If individuals are able to evacuate safely, they may still face barriers in accessing adequate and accessible temporary housing, locating necessary medical resources or equipment, or staying informed on the progression of the disaster and emergency plan. Crises. Although all people are susceptible to experience the effects of a crisis, individuals with disability may be disproportionately affected by high-end healthcare-related crises. Non-accessible healthcare provider prejudice and lack of necessary health coverage constitute as a health crisis for individuals with disabilities. Facing a health crisis can result in a decline in health condition, functional capabilities, mental state, and ability to participate in work, school, or social environments. Individuals with disabilities are also at a significantly higher risk of experiencing a crisis associated with physical, sexual, and/or emotional abuse. Often, this abuse can go unnoticed or unreported for years and result in significant adverse health and behavioral conditions that can require counseling interventions to prevent continuing negative impact on the individual's home, work, school, or social life. Individuals with psychiatric disabilities face an increased risk of experiencing a mental health crisis as a result of their disability. These crises may result in forced hospitalizations, guardianships, and/or loss of job, housing, or student status. Mental health crisis episodes can leave an individual feeling overwhelmed, confused, helpless, angry, guilty, or grief-stricken. Entering this mental state can open a feedback loop wherein the results of the original mental health crisis foster the creation of a declined mental state and result in another mental health crisis. Additionally, individuals experiencing a mental health crisis are faced with extreme risk if police personnel are called to act as first responders on their behalf, as police personnel are not trained to safely intervene with someone experiencing a mental health episode or crisis. This can result in undue arrest, bodily harm, escalation of the mental crisis, or in extreme cases, death. Economic recessions and disease outbreaks also disproportionately affect individuals with disabilities at a higher rate than the general population. Individuals with disabilities experience a significantly higher rate of unemployment during these times, a rate at which is already high even outside of recessions or disease outbreaks, and face more difficulty in regaining employment after the crisis is past. Lack of employment leads to a predictable negative outcome such as overall decrease in quality of life and psychological well-being. Additionally, individuals with disabilities that result in a compromised or suppressed immune system face an increased susceptibility to contracting diseases during outbreaks and experiencing more significant negative effects of the disease. Moreover, emergency treatment provided during disease outbreaks may not be available to individuals with compromised or suppressed immune systems, or may interfere with other medical treatments deemed necessary for the individual.